Hey, seventh graders, me, Mr. Aller, here with another one of your flip lessons live from my couch. You should have your Causes of Civil War packet. Should be pretty self-explanatory. There's going to be a cause. There's going to be a date. There's going to be kind of a what happened, kind of results, why it happened type thing to fill in your notes. Some of this we've already done in class. We talked about the compromises in class. We're going to review those and talk about some more of the conflicts as a result of the events leading up to the Civil War. All right, here we go. First, we should have talked about this in class today, the Missouri Compromise in 1820. And then what happened, the issue was basically new states were being added to the Union, and this is going to upset the battle of political power. In 1820, we had about half and half. Half of the states were free, half of the states were slaves. This meant that political representation was about half, meaning in the House of Representatives and the Senate, you had about half the members of both parts of our legislative branch being free, members of the other half of the legislative branch being slave. And Missouri wants to enter the Union. They want to enter the Union as a slave state. This is a big issue because what this is going to happen with future laws, particularly with dealing with slavery, that means that there's an upset in the balance of power. So if there's a law comes up banning slavery, everyone's going to vote no, or the sides are going to vote no, are going to have more votes than the sides that could possibly vote for it. So we need to come up with some sort of compromise because the northern states are not going to allow Missouri to enter the Union. So what happens is Missouri is going to enter the Union as a slave state. Maine is going to enter the Union as free state, and then slavery is going to be banned over the 36 degree 30 latitude line. All right. The person who came up with the Missouri Compromise is somebody that we should know. The election of 1824, guy by the name of Henry Clay. All right. So if we look at a map real quick, we can look at all the major parts. All right. First, we look at Missouri is going to be admitted as a slave state, 1820. We're going to have Maine entered as a free state in 1820, and then you can see that Missouri Compromise line that is going to be right there. There's one problem with this compromise, all right, if you can see it, because remember, everything north of that compromise is going to be a slave state. Can you spot it? If you can spot it, send me post it onto your class's Schoology website in a complete sentence, and I'll give you a bonus point. Compromise of 1850. The date should be pretty self-explanatory. I mean, look up maybe Compromise of 1850. I'll say that again, just for some folks that might be a little slow to the draw. So we get about 30 years, and basically the same issue comes up. And this compromise kind of shows that things are not going well. The issue is how to deal again with the spread of slavery. In 1820, Missouri wants to come in as a slave state. In 1850, California wants to come in as a free state. This is going to upset that balance of power again. There isn't anyone else who's ready to be a state yet, so we've got to give some provisions to the slave states. So the compromise is this, and it's a multi-step compromise, a little difficult to understand. California is going to become a free state. Slavery is going to be banned in Washington, D.C. New Mexico and the Utah Territory are going to be able to allow slavery, and it's going to be a stronger fugitive slave law. The stronger fugitive slave law is going to make it so not only can slaves be brought back to the South who are escaping, but people in the North could be arrested. The Compromise of 1850 doesn't work at all. It doesn't really make anybody happy. It doesn't make the North at all happy because of the fugitive slave law. It doesn't make the South happy because California is becoming a free state. And then slavery is banned in Washington, D.C. So this act isn't going to really help anybody. You can see the map where we've created, again, the Missouri Compromise is kind of voided with this, or not quite with this one. It's going to be voided a little bit later, but you can kind of see there wasn't really anywhere to add any additional territory that's going to become slaves, so we had to kind of add those provisions in. Uncle Tom's Cabin is written in 1852. It is a novel that is written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. It is a novel published about a slave family. It is fictional, but it's kind of one of those stories that is based on true events. It's going to be one of those stories that the North reads, and it's going to be a rallying cry against slavery because it talks a lot about issues of slavery. There's families being sold. There's issues of abuse and whipping and things like that. The South is going to be outraged by the book. It is illegal in some places to own or read the book, and it is really kind of one of those turning points where it becomes extremely popular in the North. The only book that's selling more copies is going to be the Bible. And in the South, they're basically burning the book because they think it's against everything that they believe in. The Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to happen in 1854, and we've got another issue. The Kansas and Nebraska territories are going to be organized, so we've kind of got to figure out, are they going to be slave or are they going to be free? And the main reason is we want to build a railroad through this territory. So we've got to figure out how we're going to organize them. The act, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, created by Stephen Douglas, is going to allow settlers to decide on slavery by popular sovereignty, which means you're going to have people able to go in and vote. Now, what happens? So they're going to vote on slavery. So they're going to have a vote in each territory. However many votes is going to determine whether or not there's slavery. So if there's more pro-slavery people, those two territories are going to be slave. If there's more anti-slavery people, that means those territories are going to be free. What happens is pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers are going to flock to the Kansas-Nebraska territory and have what is called Bleeding Kansas, which is going to be a series of small battles. A couple hundred people are going to be fought throughout Kansas. And this is widely considered the first battles of the Civil War, kind of like Lexington and Concord. Whole towns are going to be burnt to the ground during this bloodshed. Hundreds of people are going to be killed, and it is really kind of, again, it just is it is showing that the slavery issue is not going to be resolved. And here we can kind of see the bleeding Kansas. Force the free soiler in the political cartoon talks about people who want the slavery to be free. You can kind of see an advertisement to get people to come to vote and to take part in making Kansas Nebraska Act a free or a slave state or territory. Sorry. The Dred Scott decision in 1857 is going to be kind of a major pivotal Supreme Court decision. What happened is we're going to have an issue. Dred Scott is basically the issue is going to answer two questions: is a slave a citizen, and can Congress govern slavery? The Dred Scott decision is basically going to be a no on both of those. Dred Scott is a slave who was brought into a free territory by his master, and because he's brought to a free territory, he sues for his freedom. This case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is going to rule in 1857 that first, slaves are not citizens, so he did not have a right to sue in court. The Supreme Court is going to go above and beyond what they're asked for, and they're going to state that slaves are property. And because of that, Congress is bound by the Constitution to protect property, so they have to protect slavery. So basically, they're saying that Congress cannot make any law that takes away slavery. 1859, John Brown's raid. John Brown is going to be an abolitionist. He was a member and he took part in Bleeding Kansas. He was a free soiler in Kansas and was a captain of a free soil army of about a couple hundred men in Kansas. He's going to lead a raid on a arsenal arsenal of weapons in Harpers Ferry, Virginia. He plans to use those weapons to give to slaves to start a slave revolt. Doesn't work. Most of the members of John Brown's party are in fact going to be killed, and he himself is eventually going to be sentenced to death and hung for his efforts to try to bring slave revolt to Virginia. And we can kind of see how the two different versions of John Brown. John Brown was actually from and lived for quite a long time in the Adirondack region of New York. You can see a version of the Northern textbook where he kind of looks, pretty normal for 1859, and you can see kind of the Southern version where he kind of looks like a crazy lunatic who is kind of the main person who is dividing the nation. Election of 1860. For the date, I mean, again, I, you should be able to figure that one out. Hopefully, you don't have to ask me any questions about that on Schoology. Um, but anyways, what happened? Abraham Lincoln wins the election, and he wins the election despite the fact that he is not on any ballot in any southern state. Meaning, if you went to vote in the South, you would not have seen Abraham Lincoln's name even for a chance to vote. Um, he wasn't really truly at this point trying to get rid of slavery. He very famously talked about how if he could keep slavery and keep the Union together, he would do that. If he had to get rid of slavery and keep the Union together, he would do that as well. He was definitely against the spread of slavery. Was very concerned about slavery spreading out west, and definitely didn't want that to happen. But just about as soon as the ink was dry on the election results, South Carolina is going to secede or they're going to leave the Union. And here we can kind of see the election of 1860 map. As you can tell, you look at the states that Abraham Lincoln wins. He does not win a single southern state. However, he does reach the number of electoral votes he needed in order to win the election, and you can see the popular vote. We're getting way more people voting. Over 4 million people vote from the last election that we were looking at. Fort Sumter in 1861, first official battle of the Civil War. Southerners are going to fire on a federal fort off the coast of South Carolina. Nobody's going to perish. There's going to be no casualties. Basically, they bombarded the fort for a long time, and the Union soldiers there don't have very many supplies, don't have any ammunition to fight back, and decide to surrender the fort. And here we can see kind of where the fort was kind of a pretty uh, good spot to be in the middle of the Charleston Harbor, which could stop any boats from coming in. Um, Boats tried to resupply, but were kind of beaten back by the southern points. But that's going to be the start of the Civil War. If you have any questions, please send me a message on Schoology.